Hello, everyone. Welcome to BWS Dialogues, the podcast from Brandwidth Solutions. I'm Laura Bush, the Senior Director of Content Marketing here at Brandwidth. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Eric Langer, the President and Managing Partner of BioPlan Associates. Eric is an experienced biotechnology strategist, marketing practitioner, publisher, and researcher. We invited him to talk to us today about the current situation in hiring for technical roles in biopharmaceutical production. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
Laura, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this, what some might think is a relatively arcane, boring topic, hiring, but in reality, it has a lot of implications, especially today.
It sure does. So, has the challenge in hiring for bioprocessing operations eased over the past 20 years as the industry's become more mature and processes have become more streamlined?
Well, that's a good question. We've been looking at the industry through our annual report. We've got 22 years of data that we've collected in the annual report of biopharmaceutical manufacturing capacity and production. This specifically 22 years ago was intended to identify the bottlenecks and challenges that bioprocessors were having in manufacturing the biologics. This industry has been growing at between 11 and 14%, as we've measured it in our report, year on year, which means doubling every 5 years. So the challenge with this is that we're talking about an industry that is keeping ahead of the hiring curve. And that means that what we're seeing is that growth creating challenges, consistent systemic pain in the hiring of bioprocessing professionals capable of doing the work at a GMP level. You can't just bring somebody in off a fresh hire, because if you blow a simple step in bioprocessing, you cost the company $1 million or €1 million in one shot, in one small shot. It's very human based. And as a result, you need to have the trained people. And it is a huge challenge to train and develop. And in the current political climate, and we'll get to this, I think we'll get to this a little later, to retain those new staff in the current situation.
And is that difficulty of keeping up with the growth in the industry, is that because of just the volume of people that you need, or is it about the technologies becoming more advanced and then needing people with newer skills?
Well, the process engineers, the process development people, both up and downstream, these people are in high demand. And according to our study, we're seeing between 29 and 34% of the industry is actually having difficulties hiring for these positions. The efficiency that we've seen in the industry over time, over these decades, literally, has gone up magnitude of order, in some cases magnitudes of order, more efficient, but yet still the industry grows beyond, the industry demand for capacity grows beyond the supply, essentially, for new workers. Part of that reason is that you don't necessarily have the kinds of people you need in a GMP environment. And this, by the way, is very much regional. It's also operational variance and so forth. But what we've seen year on year is that these hiring challenges have not eased over the past, literally 20 years.
Wow. So to what extent does the capacity to manufacture a biologic relate to hiring?
And that's, I think that goes to the key here. Aside from COVID, where we saw a lot of variance and disruption in where demand was, in the past 15 years, since 2010, this year we've seen the highest number, 26% in the US particularly, are experiencing at least some significant capacity constraints resulting from either hiring or retaining experienced production staff. And that's in the US.
That's a huge number.
Yeah.
Wow. So are CDMOs in the same boat as biopharma innovator companies in terms of hiring staff, or is it different?
Yes and no. They are absolutely in the same boat. People that are doing work at a CDMO are there is some potential they can move to a different facility. But a CDMO has a different work process. They have different workflow. So if you're at a CDMO, you're much more attractive to another CDMO for as a potential hire. Therefore, CDMOs we've seen year on year on year are in a worse situation when it comes to retaining or hiring. Just as an example, 25% of biomanufacturers can't hire experienced production staff, whereas 49%, essentially half of the CDMOs, can't hire the same people. So it's almost double the problem that CDMOs are facing. And I think part of that reason is that there's a finite pool of GMP qualified CDMO staff out there. If you can't hire, and this is where we can start to talk about some of the more broad geopolitical issues. If you're not able to hire internationally, if Lonza has a facility in Switzerland and they want to hire people from their own organization to the US, and you have a geopolitical situation that we have right now, you run the risk of companies doing what we're hearing anecdotally, saying, I would rather do this by video call rather than actually move over there. I'd rather do this by a conference rather than a call, rather than actually even travel. So those kinds of attitudes and those emotions are starting to create friction that's not facilitating the hiring and the expansion of these facilities in the US. In terms of training, I mean, so you might say, well, why don't they just train more folks? And yes, you can do that. Absolutely. And they are. But you got to remember that we've have a pretty efficient, maybe one of the best in the US training processes through the universities. There are scores of universities with very high quality biotechnology manufacturing master's programs. The problem is you get a master's degree graduate, they cannot go right into a facility. There's going to be on-the-job training. To get somebody from through a master's degree program could take 3 years. So even if we started today, it'll be 2028 before we see an increase in the pipeline of qualified graduates. Then you have the on-the-job training. So that's another 2-3 years before somebody's capable of being able to manufacture. So you're talking about 2030, 2032 before we actually see the shift in the way the industry is going to be able to acquire the necessary talent. In the meantime, if a CDMO is looking to expand their staff, they've got two choices. Either they're going to have to poach somebody from another CDMO facility or another facility, which is going to raise their costs, or they're going to have to expand their training programs, which is going to take time. One way or the other, this can create a major bottleneck in the capacity potential that executives are going to have to make decisions against going forward. They may say, well, our current manufacturing plans call for a 20% increase in productivity or expansion, so we're going to expand that facility for this particular campaign. They can say, yes, we've got a manufacturing strategy. If they don't have a hiring strategy to address the needs that facility is going to make, they'll have a very significant problem on their hands.
So I'd like to ask a follow-up then about the challenges that CDMOs face. So are you saying that when you're trying to hire staff for your CDMO, that the people that you need, what you really need is people who've worked at a CDMO specifically, like that it's a different skill set from working in bioprocessing at an innovator company?
I don't think it's different skill set. I think that the workflow though would be different. And so yeah, I think the short answer is depending on the position, process development person from company A could come from company B. But when you're a PD person at a CDMO, you might be working on 5, 10 different projects. Whereas if you're an innovator, you're the number and the expectations for your job responsibilities are going to be different in terms of projects done, timelines met, etc.
And what about salary? Is it hard for CDMOs to compete salary-wise with the innovator companies?
And I don't have a lot of data. We don't really collect salary data, so it's hard for me to comment on that. But I can, if you think about supply and demand, just in general, if this if it means hiring a staff person for a particular position, and you don't have that supply, one of your resources in your toolbox in terms of hiring compensation is going to be money. So how is that going to affect if you need to have that person and the pool is too small, then very likely you're going to turn up the salary opportunity. And that's like wage inflation. So all
Yeah.
of a sudden everybody's starting to expect a lot more. And we've seen how that's played out in other bubbles.
Yeah. So that brings us to a very current topic so to what extent do you think there will be impacts from the announced H-1B visa changes on hiring in the United States for these kinds of technical roles?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting and relevant. I was actually talking with a couple of executive recruiters in Europe recently, and one said that the cross-border hiring from Europe to the U.S. has traditionally made up between 30 and 60% of their annual hires. Today, it's quote zero, zilch, unquote. There are, and that's pretty eye-opening. There are many reasons for that, and a lot of them can be emotional. But there are Roche and Nova Nordisk and Ferring recently let loose thousands of staff in Europe. So there are thousands of people that are in the job pool. If a US company would like to reach out to them as a potential hire, then the issues that we saw, for example, with the H-1B visa, where it's now costing $100,000 per visa, tariffs affecting biopharmaceuticals, creating that chaos and confusion, immigration challenges, where we've seen people from technical organizations like Hyundai and LG literally rounded up on buses and arrested. Those create a real visceral emotional response. And although these emotional responses may last weeks or months or whatnot, and they may revert. The reality is it does not help or facilitate the hiring situation. So in addition, we've got funding cuts at universities where that creates a degree of uncertainty. The FDA, the NIH are being defunded. The chaos at CDC, some of the tax laws that are changing in terms of recovery of the research expenses, things like that simply create a lot of confusion. And a lot of executives in the industry are saying, well, let's just wait. There's no reason for us to spend 100,000 for each staff to staff up our current subsidiary, for example. So, you may say, we're going to have this facility, build a facility in X state. The thinking that I can imagine could happen is executives could say, yeah, great idea. We'll go ahead and build that facility. The problem will be what happens when it's built and you need to staff it. And the staffing simply is not available. And people from headquarters are saying, well, I'd rather phone it in. You can't phone in GMP manufacturing.
Right. So eh, that brings us to the situation we're in right now, where in the United States, there's a lot of discussion about onshoring or reshoring of drug manufacturing. But so then that makes us ask the question, do we have the staffing capacity to do that?
And I think that's still to be seen. I think capacity is variable. Um, we don't know necessarily if we even have a problem yet. Anecdotally, we do. But given the hiring and retention picture we just painted over the past 20 years plus, and the real bottlenecks that onshoring may or may not experience, um, in terms of willingness to break ground for a new facility, if at some point the pool of available domestic talent just simply doesn't exist, what's the point? So the question then becomes, is onshoring, if it's going to work, it's going to require a real long-term strategic HR investment, not just in the tactical, yeah, we need 12 candidates, we need 100 candidates, but in terms of retention as well. So it's going to require time, and it's going to require resources, and potentially retooling the way companies work with and retain their employees, because they have alternatives. And in order to increase the educated, the capable, educated candidates with GMP competence, it's going to require a lot more than just filling the pipeline of university or training institute candidates. It's going to require an on-the-job training program that at present, it's our understanding that a lot of companies certainly have, but it's ad hoc. And that may not be sufficient if we become US for US kind of an environment.
Fascinating. So you alluded a little bit a few minutes ago about how current situations can affect how people feel and what they want to do. So what is the general tenor these days among bioprocessing experts as job seekers? And is it different in different countries?
And it's absolutely different in different countries, and in fact, it's different in different with different individuals. Just as it is different here, the political attitudes and approaches are very much dependent on the individual. So being able to say with a broad brush that yeah, Europe or Canada is it is no longer a good opportunity, or vice versa. I think it's too difficult to paint it that broad a stroke. But we can say anecdotally that when you talk to people who are considering jobs, we hear over and over these kinds of stories about people that say, "Nah, I don't think so," or we're actually hiring somebody from the U.S. to Canada. We've heard multiple situations where people are actually simply moving. So there are a lot of companies, I believe, that are thinking this is an opportunity for us to essentially raid, if that's a reasonable word, some of the brain trust that exists in the U.S. to other regions and be able to bring those to those other regions. China, for example, has been actively seeking to recruit. The challenge there is that even in China, and this goes back to your issue of regions, even in China, the challenge is that there are groups that are saying, I don't want to have my job at risk from somebody that's not in China. Exact same kind of a story we're hearing here. So the shift, I think, is very much dependent on where you are and the current political situation. It's complicated.
Yeah, it is. So are hiring executives in the United States seeing a shifting of attitudes or aware of a shift?
Yeah, I think this is probably this is at the crux of the issue here. If they are listening to their HR managers, they are aware that job recruiting may be slower to fill, meaning capacity expansion plans may need to be delayed. We did a project analysis recently in a developing region where facility was not the issue at all. The issue was how will they recruit appropriate staff to be able to fill this facility with the 500 or 1,000 people they were going to need. And the strategy then became, okay, what kind of hiring and retention strategy will be necessary for this particular region? It had nothing to do with the customers' needs. It had nothing to do with the current demand situation. It's if you have an empty facility with nobody running it, you've got nothing. You might as well bring out the bulldozer.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's a sobering thought. Well, with that, I guess we'll wrap up. Eric, thank you so much for talking to us today and sharing all these insights with our audience.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.